Good afternoon, and I hope that this particular talk on ICT accessibility from a policy perspective, I hope that this is something which you will find engaging, interesting, and I also hope that it will keep you awake. Okay, especially after a very heavy, sumptuous lunch in the sunny afternoon in Delhi. So I thought that when we are looking at this whole thing around ICT accessibility policy, I think it's also important for us to see what does the meaning of public policy, what is the global evolution of ICT accessibility policies, and what is the situation in India. So broadly, this is how I want to cover the whole thing. We have about 25 minutes or so. I'll try to finish within that. And after that, we can have question and answers. But however, if you have something very compelling, impelling in between, please raise your hands and we can discuss it as we go along. So that's how I have structured this whole thing. It's been about 3 years since I have been involved with the ICT accessibility policy within India. So it was in January 2009 that the government of India actually convened a particular meeting where a few people were called, I think about 20-25 people. I was one of them. And that was perhaps for the first time, for me, at least personally, the first time exposure to the role of public policy in the ICT space. Although I've been involved in the ICT policy making as such for more than a decade, but very specifically with respect to accessibility, this was the first exposure for me, and it was quite an humbling experience. It was also a meeting that was quite enriching in terms of getting different perspectives from people from civil society, from industry, from the government, and many other sectors. So I thought, before we get into what is the type of policy that we should have and what is else which is happening elsewhere, I thought it might be useful to get into a little bit about what public policy itself means. Because for a whole lot of people, I've seen this challenge. Some people believe that there must be a public policy, because if there's a government policy, everything will flow through. Some other people believe that, yes, even if you have a policy, it's not good enough, you need something else. So I thought let's just get into a little bit in terms of what public policy is, and I'll just keep on relating with accessibility and ICT within that domain. So policy is one of the instruments for the governments to discharge its function. That's where the public policy actually is, in a sense. And it can, however, have different forms and it can take different shapes. For example, you can have something like a national telecom policy, you can have something like an FDI policy in retail, you can have, for that matter, an ICT accessibility policy in India. So this is only a very broad thing that, okay, it is one of the instruments. Of course, the government has many other instruments also at its disposal. And after that, what we should look at is, what is the purpose of a policy? So the purpose of a policy could be to provide guidance. That means in those situations, it is typically a non-mandatory type of thing. It is typically persuasive in nature. Okay? It could be just a guidance that, okay, please do things such and such way, but this is not a mandate that you must do things in such and such manner. It could also be that the government may convey its intentions or its aspirations. For example, the government may come out with some plan which may say that we want to achieve 8.5 or 9% growth in economic terms. It may say that we want to extend accessibility, for example, solutions to so many percentage of people. It can also have a specific focus group. For example, it can either target at children, it can target rural or urban or peri-urban areas, or for that matter, it can also target particular type of disabilities. It could also target particular fashions of doing certain things in terms of accessibilities. For example, it could be about using ICT, it could be about having a framework, for example, a building code, which is accessible building code, or that type of thing. It could also have additional things. For example, what are the things that the government itself can do? So, for example, the government can say that all of our websites shall be accessible. Government can also say that all of the government offices, etc., shall be physically accessible, and things like that. Okay? So whether they have ramp, whether they have switches in the lifts in terms of with braille signs, whether there's a separate washroom for people on wheelchairs and things like that. So it can have different type of intentions or aspirations, And it can also, as I said earlier, it can have tangible time frames, it can, or at times it may not have any of those things. Okay? Then it can provide or develop a framework, and at times it can change fundamentally the basic framework underlying something. So let me give you one example. Today we see mobile phones proliferation around all over. In 1994, the government had come out with a national telecom policy. However, due to certain challenges, the industry was not performing very well. Around 98, 99, industry had almost come to a halt and was bleeding big time. In 99, the government came up with a new policy where suddenly they said that although these bidders, the telecom licensees, who had earlier bid for a flat license fee which was to be payable over the next 15, 20 years, instead of doing that, they shall now onwards be paying the percentage revenue of their total revenue as the license fee. And that was a fundamental change. Of course, it also brought about certain other things, but this was one particular fundamental change within that particular policy framework. So it can do that type of thing also. It can also be a situation that a new policy is needed or is rather promulgated at times in order to comply with an international treaty. It could be a bilateral